Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us for our annual shareholder meeting. If you'll notice that we released 2 items in the last several weeks to review. Sorry, Dan, can you mute that color? For your questions were answered via the open shareholder letter or the open letter to shareholders. And we had an incredibly thorough release of our annual report. So in that document, there are pages and pages of detailed information of what happened for the last year, how it happened, and why we kept moving forward and expanding. So first, I want to just acknowledge and thank all the investors for supporting the company that are here and that are not here. And on the private side, we had an incredible year where we raised in a single raise in less than 3 weeks, actually, of commitments, over $8.5 million, which is vastly unheard of from private individuals in the OTC space. So I thank you all for your support and believing in the vision that we have and the data that we've presented. So with that, I thank all of you and our board has worked so hard, and Dan and Western Frontier, who have driven this so hard all winter, lived on the mountain, gone through so much. I think Matt's got like 13 feet of snow around him still, which is crazy. He's up there making sure everything's moving forward. So, and with our new lab in Emmett, we're just making progress every day. So I thank everybody for that support so we can do those pieces. And as we move forward, we're going to be able to not only control the region, but continue to grow from there. So we've taken what was originally in 2021, about 53 acres of claims, and moved to over 4,500 acres. So our expansion has been absolutely incredible. I'd like to thank Unity and its group for working very hard to get their diligence and working with the state of Washington and various compliance issues that caused some delays there for that to be done before the mining season opened. Whether it was done in November, whether it was done in April, it wouldn't matter. We can't get to that ground and do more testing until that ice and snow is out of the way and the roads open. So once that moves forward, we'll be able to do more testing and provide the street with some more information on what that 200,000 tons or so of tailings or mine spoils may be worth. We've seen some initial data that looks very promising. From there, we've gone from what was an exploration company on the side of a hill to a company that has a very unique laser technology that solved the problem that Colorado Schools of Mines was working on for 50 years with our team in a very short time. We have been in conversations. I do read your emails. You guys have a lot of questions on this. I've had several conversations with 3 key groups on that laser technology and moving forward. I can't talk about it at all. It is just under NDA and we can't explore those ventures until they have more data and we have more data to support it. So we'll continue to work on that in the background with our engineers and find a viable path to either spin that company off or joint venture with one of these larger groups, whether that be interplanetary or extraplanetary. Those conversations have been very interesting. Gabe Achenbach's done a great job there, so I want to thank him as well. As we did acquire Pony Meadows or Silver Monarch, as some of you know it, as private land, as our first private land in January, and then we closed Unity, so we now hold 208 acres of private patented claims, which is a very big deal. I think that people are underestimating how much a private patented claim means in the mining space. We can do more work much faster from that perspective than we can otherwise. So huge milestones there. I'll let the operations team touch on some of the other milestones that we reached through the year that we've touched on online, but I think it's very important for all of you to hear that. So as we move towards production, Dan will go over where we expected to be, a few things that got in the way, and then finding out that those things that got in the way ended up being very valuable. So please listen to that, and I'm very, very proud of what our team has done. And we're moving forward with our capital raise, with our expansion. And then after that, we will be working towards full SEC reporting, which we will then move towards uplisting when possible to whichever exchange is most attractive to our shares and shareholders. We're evaluating, we've been asked to reverse merge into shells in London, Toronto, and NASDAQ from other companies. And we have also evaluated going into the new NYSE Texas market as well, which I like the most, but we'll see which is best for shareholders. So we are evaluating that as we move forward and making sure that we have all the background information ready and compliant with that SEC reporting so we can move forward as we move our company to the next level, which is production and revenue. That is our main goal. As one of our board advisors or board of directors states, that's our only goal right now, is to get to revenue, to get to a lot of revenue and grow the company, because we know that's what everybody needs. So with that, I'd like to have Dan and Matt really share their experience and their story of how this year started, the difficulties and the unexpected pieces that got in the way, and then some of the things that Steve Dobson discovered with Matt and Dan, and then through that with various testing, we were able to see what that was and capture that opportunity, and then use that opportunity to grow. So with that, I'll leave it to Dan.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, Sean and Matt. You jump in as well too. So for those of you that don't know or are new to this, I've been involved in this project for going on 19 years. You know, a lot of that is research, understanding the area, and fighting through a lot of the different difficulties that you know just come with this type of a project. But one of the things I really want to talk about is at the end of 2023, we really had what we believed was a great plan moving forward that was based on fire assays. It was based on historical information, what the different labs, everything from Florin Labs, American Labs, I mean, what we were seeing. So what that information was telling us was that this was a gold and silver project. And part of what we did was we designed a recovery system based on gold and silver. So we put together a gravity system, a really small test facility that we put together up on site. And working through that process, we made some projections. We started looking at, because our goal was to get to some revenue so that we can advance the exploration of what we're wanting to look at and do it without having to raise a lot of funds. And we wanted to use the resources that were available because we had located with Steve and doing exploration, we had located the stockpiles. We had great results from those. They were very promising. And so as we started utilizing the shaker table and the crusher and the ball mill, that provided concentrate so that we could start doing some smelter tests. And when we started doing the smelter tests, one of the pieces that was really kind of interesting is I had some expectations of when I would do a smelter, I get doré material. And one of the things when you use a lot of oxidizers, and I won't get too detailed with this, but is you're going to get a gold and silver doré. So I did that. I used just 800, all I used was 800 grams of a concentrate. And I did the first smelter test. And I ended up with like 129 grams, a pretty heavy metal doré. But one of the things that did make sense, which it shouldn't have occurred. And so working with the metallurgists and the team that we have, everybody's like, well, that doesn't make any sense. And so, and moving the irons. And so then we took it up to Liberty Refiners to have an XRF take a look at it. And
Dan, I think you're breaking up a little bit. If you want to,
iridium, go ahead.
Dan, if you want to turn your camera off, I think you're having a bandwidth issue on your site.
Bandwidth, okay. That's probably a good idea. Probably scare less people.
Thank you. So they go back to the XRF from Liberty.
So how is it coming across now?
You're good. You're more clear. Go ahead.
Okay.
Thank you.
So we take it up, we do an XRF, and it shows iridium and some other PGMs, which to us make no sense. I mean, when you look at the geological history, the old geological reports, it's just not making any sense. So when we have that conversation and we start looking at it, Steve Dobson says, well, you know, one of the things that I've seen here is I see a lot of evidence of a meteor strike. And, you know, I've been a cop for a long time and retired. And so I'm a big skeptic. I'm a huge skeptic. I have to see, and things have to be proven to me. So Steve takes me out. He's showing me the why he is. And I actually have a minor in geology, so I understood a fair amount of what he was showing me. But he explained to me why he believed what he believed. And Steve, CGMs. So we had done work with Liberty Refiners previously, and had worked with Dr. DeMen and PTOE Labs with some good results. So that's where we sent it to based on his expertise, his experience with dealing with PGMs. And that's what we got back, is there's PGMs here. And we really started taking a look at the amount or the volumes of PGMs is high. I mean, and it's across the board. And what that means is now you have a very complex ore. So we're essentially seeing 8 precious metals in this material based on the results that we have. And what that changes is your ability to recover the materials. Even though the assays show it and it's in there, they're alloyed. So what you have to figure out is you have to figure out the metallurgy and what's the process of separation. You know, so we went from, we've got a gold and silver product to, holy cow, it's a, wow, this is a challenge and this is something we didn't expect. But what it does to the value of the project and the uniqueness of the project and the value to the shareholders is enormous. So now we have to change how we're going to approach everything. Everything has to be redone. We have to research. And so we're bringing in people. We have Andrew Perlea, we have Dr. Demena, we have, you know, Guy, and we have Matt, we have Steve, and we have other players that are involved that are figuring this out. But that's where these delays in reaching that revenue goal came from. But they're good delays, because what it means is this site has a lot more potential. And beyond just the platinum group metals, the gold and the silver, you also have what we've discovered is the rare earths that are there as well. It's just complex, so it slowed us down. Matt, do you think I missed anything there in kind of explaining, or Sean, anything else you want me to cover on that piece?
I think that was pretty good.
Go ahead, Matt. Please go ahead. Sorry.
I thought that was pretty good, Dan. If you want, I can kind of jump into our quick presentation and then let you continue from there if that works.
Sean, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, the only thing I'd add is that, so the data, just to summarize, because you broke up a little bit, just to make it clear for all of our shareholders here who are on the call. So the initial data that we had suggested that through a relatively easy smelting process, we'd be recovering somewhere between a bonanza grade ore level, like about an ounce per ton or a little more on the smelt. And that was the initial data we had on that set of material. So when we went to go make that doré, it was consistent. It was actually higher. So the ratio was very high on what was created. It was just indestructible. So that was the problem when we made the bar, if you will. So Matt, maybe you want to touch on that a little bit. I know we've made a video and published that, but if you want to share that experience of what that doré was like and the experience with trying cyanide first and moving to aqua regia and going through that process to discover what we have and why that provides evidence of iridium and things like that. I think it's very important for people to understand and how that led to your excitement for expansion.
Absolutely. It was what Dan was talking about on what we expected to see and what we were seeing coming across the table versus then what was happening in the smelt was rather confusing at first. And then once we kind of put the pieces together that there was some sort of platinum group metals in play, it really started to explain everything. And when that when we started working with a lot of the buttons that we were creating on that, and just how, indestructible, they couldn't be drilled, they couldn't be cut, no amount of really acid or anything would touch them. And that was when we learned just how difficult this process was going to be. Once you put them into that form of the button, as we call it, after the smelt, it can be incredibly difficult to do anything with that. But I think overall we learned a tremendous amount, and it put us really on the right path that we're on today.
Sure. So from the historic standpoint, we had that issue, and then later in the year, Guy and Matt and our team was able to separate some of these materials on a test basis. So we were able to float platinum, we were able to precipitate palladium, we were able to separate silver, separate gold in the test facility, right? So as a test capacity, and then later we'd move on to get a clean test facility so Guy and our team can work in a clean environment and do more lab work without having intermittent power or other issues that you have at elevation in the middle of nowhere. Is that correct, Matt?
Absolutely. Yeah. And if you don't mind, I'll just dive into our presentation right now, just a real quick overview.
That's good.
And I'm just going to turn my camera off to save a little bit of bandwidth. So our Warren District 2024 overview. We made some large improvements to our crushing circuit at the beginning of the year. We brought in a new crusher via helicopter, which was installed and has been working great. And then over the summer, we went through and enclosed a large portion of the mill building that had been left open initially. And that's given us a lot more room to work with this winter, making things a lot easier for us, and really just a massive overall improvement. And the important thing too is we're saving everything that goes through the mill. Even the tailings, everything's getting put into either buckets or super sacks and is being saved for future use and stuff like that. And obviously the discovery of PGMs really had a significant impact on the year, what we were hoping to get for revenue and stuff like that. But as Dan and Sean, you guys have both said, it ends up being a big benefit as far as value. It just did set us back a little bit. But we really never doubted what we were dealing with was incredibly valuable. And that's the benefit of really using the table and getting to see every day on the ground here what is coming across the table and the sort of values that we are seeing in the actual rock we're processing. And one of the more recent studies we've been working on is a grind size study, as we're kind of working towards a new mill in the future and all that. We're kind of working on how fine of a grind do we need to get to best liberate these and get the best recovery. And that's something that we're still working on today. And then another big victory for the year was we started designing kind of a new pilot plan, figuring out, between the whole team and Guy and Andrew Prelea and Steve and Dan, kind of deciding what all we're going to want in this future pilot plant and mill. And that was a big victory for the year, I think. And then just moving on to a couple other things across the Warren District real quick. The Walla Walla, we had several good site visits out there. We learned a lot about it. We're still looking at permitting and stuff like that. And we did do a little bit of cleanup that the Forest Service requested as far as removing some stuff from prior operators. And while we were out there doing that, we really dove into some of the historic equipment that was out there, including the historic milling equipment, and being able to visually examine the ore that was milled out there was very impressive to see, and is really lines up the Walla Walla to be another great resource in the future. I think Sydney's very well situated on that.
Kind of cut out there, Matt.
Sorry, what part did I lose you on?
Just a few seconds there towards the end.
Basically what I was saying is while we were out at the Walla Walla, we really looked into some of the historic equipment that they were milling with and got a great glimpse at the high grade ore they were mining and just how valuable it is, how rich it is. And I think that's going to end up being a great resource for Sydney in the future. Another item we tackled was we did a drone survey of the Lucky Bend property, which is going to be very helpful as far as planning our mill expansion. And then as we're already working on designing the future road for permitting and evaluating really the full potential of the patented property that Sydney is both already has and is adding in the future. And so that was incredibly useful, as well as for environmental reasons, monitoring high energy runoff areas where we can expect to have a lot of snow melt. As you know, it's not crazy to see 10, 15 feet of snow in places. And when that starts to melt and starts to run off, you can have some environmental issues that go along with that. And here's just a rough view for anybody that's unfamiliar with the site of the sort of terrain we're working with.
So one thing is, if I could jump in here real quick, Matt, is for everybody that can see that image, that gives you an idea of the terrain we're working with. You can see the road systems. You can see how steep it is. It's not for the faint of heart, let me tell you that. And then throw 10 to 15 feet of snow up there. But that's what those are the conditions that we're working in every day. This is a good overview. When they'll ask, well, how come you just don't do this, or how come you just don't do that? That picture really explains a lot. And one of the other pieces I wanted to just touch, kind of back up a little bit, Matt, when you were talking, about the new guy and Steve, everybody that's involved right now. When you talk about a test mill or a test circuit, it's essentially made up of a conveyor. It goes into a crusher, it goes into a ball mill, and then it goes onto a table that is designed to separate gold and silver. So now that we know we have...
Dan, we lost you there. So the mill building is what you're talking about. And then now that we know that we're dealing with PGMs is where we lost you.
Okay. So can everybody hear me now? Okay.
Yep, you're good. Please go again.
Okay. So now that we know we're dealing with the PGMs and we're dealing with the rare earths, the table that was selected for the purpose of gold and silver doesn't function the way it's supposed to. So the conversations that we're having is, what type of equipment do we need to accommodate the complexity of this ore so that we can recover? Because one of the things we can't do, and I hear this all the time, we'll just take it to a mill. I'd be happy if anybody can point a mill that can handle this type of ore within 5,000 miles. I'd love to know of it, because what I know is one doesn't exist. So those aren't options. They're not viable options. But what we do know is we can strategically set up a facility where we can do everything on site. Does it take time? Yes. But what it does is it maximizes the value and the longevity of the project. So those are important. People want things now, but it's important.
It is important, Dan, and you're breaking up again.
So that the mine life...
A little bit of clarification while you were broke up there. We have ordered a new Dijkstra table as well. So this isn't something that we're sitting on our hands for. That table has been ordered and is in process of being delivered to the test facility during the winter, so we can learn how to use it properly while the site is covered in snow, and then we'll move it to the site come spring. But please, I think you're back, Dan, so go ahead. Possibly you're back, Dan.
Wow, this is what we're not just waiting. We're actually solving problems. Another very valuable piece of equipment we have coming is we have a very sophisticated benchtop XRF machine. And so we don't have to wait on samples from the lab what Guy is dealing with in solution, and it's going to speed the process. But it's important to understand the complexity of this process, and it takes time. But we've got a great team that is working on that problem, because the new mill circuit, instead of 3 pieces of equipment, could have 15 pieces of equipment. I mean, you're talking about spirals, and you're talking about flotation cells, and you're talking about all the pieces that you need to do this efficiently and effectively. And that's what we've been spending a lot of time doing.
Excellent.
So Matt, you can go ahead and continue there.
Awesome. Thank you, Dan. And yeah, that's exactly correct. One of the other big improvements we have made in 2024 was setting up the new lab in Emmett, which, as you guys have touched on, it is a much more secure environment. Having really reliable power for smelting and various other electrical needs is very useful compared to being up on the mountain. And it's a very good, clean space. You're not dealing with tracking in a ton of snow or a ton of mud, depending on the time of the year. And it's really been incredibly helpful so far. And as Sean mentioned, we have a much larger, more purpose-built table for concentrating that's supposed to be getting delivered sometime in the next about week and a half, hopefully. And that's going to be a big improvement. And so we've got some photos here just to show we have a large industrial fume hood, and then our water tanks and an enclosure for the new furnace and such. Another big improvement that we made so far this year in 2024 has been we put some office space up on the mountain, and that's actually where I'm taking this call from right now. And it's been very useful as far as giving us a kind of a central point to organize a lot of the historic data that Sydney has acquired over the years, especially with the Unity acquisition. Just a ton of data, and having a centralized location to keep everything together and safe and usable is incredibly helpful, along with really making it much more livable for the 14, 16-hour days on the mountain. It's a lot nicer to have a heated or cooled office to work in, and it's really kind of functions almost as a geology base camp too, which is very helpful. It doesn't seem like a huge thing, but Steve Dobson does a tremendous amount of traveling and exploring around the whole district, and that was one of the pieces that led to the Unity acquisition, is just what he was seeing across the whole district. And having a good central point to keep all your maps, all your samples, everything organized is going to be a tremendous help.
Real quick, if I could jump in just real quick, Matt, is one of the things about Steve is you have geologists, you have a lot of academic type geologists that read a lot of other geologists' reports, and they don't really spend a lot of time in the field. And one of the reasons why we're where we're at today, and why we understand where we're at, he's actually on a flight with his son. But he's really excited about this project. And when Steve gets done doing a full day on the mountain, is what Steve does is he goes out and he explores. And that's what led to these discoveries and to the understanding. He travels miles every day, and he looks at the geology, and that's where he discovered what he believed at the time was, I think this was a meteor strike. And when you say that, it's like, yeah, okay, Steve, it's a meteor strike. But then when he takes you out and he shows you how you've got basement rocks, which are called crystalline basement rocks, that should be flat or stood on end, and they shouldn't be laminated, but they are. And Steve really put together a great sampling packet and detailed notes of what his theory was, and that's been shared with the University of Alaska Fairbanks. And the University of Alaska Fairbanks, people say, why are you working with them? They have a team that specializes in that area. And their conclusions after reviewing that material is it's a high probability that Steve's right. They're planning site visits. They're working on grant proposals to study this. It's so unique. And it's nice to have those kinds of organizations reaffirming. But Steve has a tremendous understanding because he spends the time understanding the geology and the history and the review. And that's really what's led to the expansion, which is the piece Matt's going to talk to you about now.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you, Dan. And that's what we're looking at here is, the map of Sydney Resources Holdings in the Warren District. And it's really a tremendous accomplishment when you look at what it was even just a couple of years ago. And it really is driven by what we see on the ground and in the field and just how exciting it is, really. This is not at all a common project, and this is not at all the sort of common grades and challenges that you see, but it's a phenomenal opportunity, and Sydney's done a great job of capitalizing on it and acquiring all this ground.
So, and what drove these expansions was you look at the history, we identified where the production mines are, looked at the mine spoils piles. We started collecting data because just a short time ago on the display there, you see where it says leased and there's 2 red boxes. So that's what we leased originally. We didn't own it, we leased it. And then we had 5 claims that were associated with that were essentially 20 acres apiece. So we were leasing it. We didn't have ownership. Well, now you look, we still lease those, but you look at the other large.
We lost you right there, Dan, and this is important. So
that's 8 acres.
Could go back a minute and just say that over because you broke up after the 100 acres.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yep, go ahead.
Okay, so with the lease, well, now what you see the other, we don't lease them, we own them. That's 208 acres of private land that we own. And you see all of those other areas in the green, the colors there, those are claims that Sydney owns. That's not Sydney leasing. That is what Sydney owns, and that's enormous. And the strategy behind the private property is it allows us to do our operations on private property. It minimizes or eliminates our need to do surface disturbances on public lands, which is a huge challenge. And so there was a strategy behind this that's based on real-time data, historical production records. So what we understood is we know we have a historical mining district that was one of the largest gold production districts in the United States that didn't close down because they ran out of gold. They were shut down by the Federal Gold Act in the 30s. And what we now do is we control that. We own that. That's a huge value for our shareholders, for the company, and for everybody that's touched by this project.
So I just want to touch base on that a little bit on the strategy behind that. So last May, late April into May, we ran into the confounding variable of what we found were PGMs. And that's when we decided to stop sharing so overtly all the time. We went a little quiet for a while, and that was done very strategically. If any of you are in business and try to acquire competitors or area around you, if you tell them it's great before you buy it, it gets more expensive, or you run into other competitors trying to come in and make these claims. So strategically, we reached out to University of Alaska Fairbanks to confirm these items through Steve Dobson and Western Frontier. So we all worked together to get that data there. And as they confirmed they believed it was interesting and viable, we began the process with some other individuals to help claim that first set of 2,000 public acres. So that's very important. So we did that to insulate ourselves from competition, because what people may not know is that sometimes smaller mining companies find something really, really valuable and great, and one of the majors will come in and surround them and basically crush them. They can cut off road access. They can do a lot of very aggressive business maneuvers to make the life of the very small company with limited capital very difficult. So what we did strategically was place defense around ourselves so we can work well. Additionally, Matt and Ethan put together, that's Western Frontier, put together a plan for future mining, which is a spiral decline. So how do we access beyond this first 25,000 tons? So they put a plan together to intersect with multiple veins on an annual basis to replicate that yield, so we can have that year in, year out and create value and revenue in multiples of what our company is worth today. So we grow with that, we grow with what we have, and we grow with the presence of platinum group metals. And later we found there's also rare earths, because you have a minerally dense deposit that's likely from a superheated meteorite. So there's a lot more interesting things in the area. With that, we also then began that conversation in earnest in July as the lease ended with Endomines for the Unity, and we were able to engage that conversation in earnest without stepping on any toes. So eventually they had to break their lease, as Endomines did not act in accordance with the lease, and we had to wait for that to be done before they could move forward, which took some time. But that acquisition also was strategic, and it's more private land to build more spiral declines with multiple veins. So we were having a conversation with not only our geologist, Steve Dobson, but another geologist from another team, and their conversation led to the belief that all 23 veins that we now control are the same vein that have separated over hundreds of millions of years. So that meteorite impact created this vein a long, long time ago. And as the earth is folded, it is separated to this region to what we know of as at least 23 times. And we control all of those. So we have really good data, and you guys may have seen this the other week. We have great data and inferred resource on one vein on one part of our property. That vein is contiguous onto the Unity, which is in green. So it goes from our leased area through the other property. So about 9,000 feet of that is on our land. And the very conservative estimate based on fire assays and the data from multiple sets of independent third-party sources without anything from PTOE or any chemical analysis is that that region would be, or that vein rather, would be worth in dollars from, I believe it's March 10th with gold prices, so it's gone up a little bit, was about $8.7 billion of gold and silver in that vein alone. We now know also that the vein adjacent material is also rich in mineralization. So we often find gold more central in the vein, and we're finding PGMs less central to the vein, depending on which vein it is, of course, or which area. So this is why we've gone through this period where we didn't communicate daily, or we really wanted to. We want to share everything we can, but at the same time, I don't want to pay more for things and dilute shareholders when we don't have to. So at the end of the day, we're maximizing the value of not only the ore assets, but also the regional assets by controlling them. So with that, we had a great round on our raise. We were able to use this data to share that with us and our shareholders to show that this is an incredible project that has multiples of value beyond what we're worth today. And even if there's a lot of skepticism around the PTOE labs, the gentleman has done incredible PGM work around the world, but let's just say that's 20 times wrong. That still puts our corporate value in a conservative multiple about 10 times or greater of what we are today. So we do have to get to production. We do have to get to revenue, and we are working very hard to do that. And that is our main goal, is to do that. And then we will build these several spiral declines and be in constant revenue year in and year out. The other side of that is we are now being approached for partnerships for companies to say, well, can we help build one of those spiral declines and have a joint venture in it? So we are getting attention on these other issues as well. But is it the best path for the shareholder to do that, or do we do one side at a time and expand organically? So we'll do that analysis as a company and do our best to move forward. So with that, I'll give it back to Dan and Matt for a moment.
Thanks, Sean. Go ahead, Matt.
That was the most of kind of our presentation on this end. If you want, I can kind of leave this map up. I know there's a little bit more you were going to talk about.
Yeah, that would be great. So one of the pieces that I was actually having a conversation, or I've had multiple conversations with Andrew Pelea, and I keep an eye on what people talk about or different things in the different areas, and we know that there's a lot more exploration work to be done. But I want people to understand the strategy of why we've done it the way that we have. So when Steve found and we came across the stockpiles that they're only located, less than 3,000 feet from our test mill facility. So we have those. We see what the assays are, and we see what the potential revenues are from those. So there's two paths forward. Either we can raise money like most mining companies do in the United States and spend tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars on exploratory drilling to prove something out, and then they're never successful at moving it forward. There's a lot of mines out there that have 43-101s. They have all that, and they can't move forward because they're broke. They just can't do it. So what we decided to do is we've done decades of research. We have historical data, historical production records. We know geology. I've got geology reports that go back to the 30s, in the 40s, the 50s, the 60s. On all of the mines that were in production there. I've got reports on the milling reports that were done. So we know a lot. We have the historical data. But what we decided to do was to generate a revenue source, move strategically, lock up the area, but have a source of revenue that can pay for the exploration work. Drilling is not cheap, and so you need to do it smart. But as Andrew Pelea was saying just the other day, he said our strategy is going to result in that we can do the exploration and do things that typical U.S. companies don't do, is fly this. So we're doing the magnetic studies by having this area flown. And when we use that in conjunction with historical data, he estimates that we'll actually have to do about only 10% of the drilling that would need to be done to prove out these reserves and do a 43-101 type study. So there's a strategy behind this. We're not saying that we're not going to do that kind of work. It's just we're doing this in a way that we don't have to create enormous debt or tremendous share dilution to accomplish those goals. Because once you prove this big of a reserve out, you're talking about mine life that's decades in length, and that's tremendous value for the shareholders.
And to highlight some of that data and a few key points is that we want the mineral reserve estimate. We want that for our shareholders. We want that for ourselves. Remember that every executive in this company is a shareholder. Every executive on this team has put money into the company. We have all participated in the risk with you. We are not free riding this investment. Our board has put in a lot of money. Materially, about half the raise in the last several years has been from effectively the insiders privately. So I think that's very important to recognize that we are all participating in this, and we are all putting our own dollars at risk for this endeavor because we believe in it. And with that, when we prove the concept of extrapolating the resource or extracting it from the various ore types that are here and separating that into the metals and achieving sales, we don't just want the revenue and the PE ratio that goes with revenue. We want the stock value that comes with a full MRE, a mineral resource estimate. So we want those 23 veins, we want those different pieces to have a full value received for the street, because you're going to get value to the stock as that mineral resource estimate is established. The more confident it is as we go to indicated or measured, we know that that's going to drive value. But what's most important today is that I don't take one of these offers for 60 or $100 million of debt at insane rates that would either bankrupt the company and somebody else would take us over, or the company gets back $300 or $400 million. Rather, the other company lending it gets that back before we get the dollars to our shareholders. So that is exactly why we are engaging the behavior we are doing. And the plan we are in is to create significant revenue to not have hundreds of millions of dollars of debt, because we know we're right there. And as we separate those assets, we're going to be able to sell them. I've had conversations with Chinese firms, with German firms that will buy our concentrates. One of the concentrates that they wanted to be purchased, they just wanted the rare earths out of them, but they were going to charge a 50% profit split. That's ridiculous. For the Chinese groups, they only want part of it, but we know we're not going to be able to get the asset back, so we lose that. So there's a lot of pieces that are happening for the defense of the shareholder and the long-term revenue and growth of the company. And because of those pieces, we've put together an exceptional raise considering the size of our company. And that was done through our network. There were no institutions involved with that. Those were all individuals and through our personal networks to drive that. And it was done very quickly because the evidence is so compelling. So you guys have seen it. I think it's wonderful. Beyond that, institutional investor interest is growing. We're getting more calls from various offices. We're having larger companies contact us for partnerships. It's about finding the best place to move forward for your protection and mine. How do we do this in the capacity where we all win together and we all have a great experience? I know many investors on this call are already up from years before I was here. You're up several thousand%, which is incredible. But what I want to do is create liquidity, because right now our stock doesn't have a volume, in my opinion, to be liquid. So one of the actions we took this year is we formed a committee to work on SEC compliance. We hired a consultant to work on full SEC reporting and compliance so we can create that investor liquidity. We can drive that shareholder value so it can be realized. I think that's very important for all of us. So not only do we control multiples of what we once did, we know that the value is there. We have multiple assay datas, whether you want to look at the incredibly wonderful PGM data from PTOE that shows multiple ounce densities, or if you like the more conservative data from the fire assays that still shows over an ounce per ton of data, those are all viable. Your sites globally that are mineable are rarely over 16 grams a ton. We are consistently around an ounce on fire, and we are well over that on the other methods of extraction using cyanide, etc. We are also working with remediation and reducing environmental impact with multiple sources. I saw someone wrote something about, why do you have so many partnerships? Because this is complicated. We need to condition the water properly. We partnered with Hydromax because we need to neutralize the water so it doesn't react. We partnered with AMW so we can create clean energy, so we can create sustainable energy in a region that is a microgrid, so we can create that. Our President Green is working on partnerships with various universities to install microgrids, geothermal, wind, solar, so we can be self-sustaining in a capacity. We've had conversations with GE's divisions on their fully electric fleet for mining equipment. We are doing this in a very intelligent, step-by-step engagement of being self-sustaining and being off the grid and taking care of it. I even looked at nuclear engineering because I love SMRs, right? Personally, I think it's a great space. I think it's the next piece. You may have heard of it in various other applications for data centers and things like that. But if we get big enough, it's something that we'll look into regionally. And I think we'll be able to support other companies too. Maybe that's too big for the region, maybe it's not. But on the remediation side, we're working with several different entities because those pieces together break down carbon chains. What people don't understand is that if I can take a group of molecules and condition them with electrophoretic engagement and change the way they're touching the things around them on a molecular basis, and then allow organisms that are genetically engineered to attach to them and break that chain down, I can remove arsenic from the region. And I can use that. They use it in oil spaces. They use it in arsenic. So by removing that arsenic, we don't run into that same problem that other people have in our region. They've spent over $100 million on that problem. And there's other polluters in southern Idaho that have the same issues. We know it's an arsenic-rich environment. What we're doing is we're creating a redundant net to stop that arsenic from being available to the environment. So not only will we self-contain it, but it's a naturally occurring phenomenon, broken rock in the area. So what we want to do is make sure that we create an organism net beyond our containment pieces to stop anything that could happen. And that's a very purposeful strategy with a lot of different groups, so we do that very well.
You know, one thing, if I can jump in real quick, Sean, on the environmental piece of this and the environmental remediation, a big part to being successful in this business, and I truly believe that a lot of mining companies miss this boat. In fact, one of the environmental conservation groups that we have discussions with, after going to our website, one of the things they said was, what I really like is your board is a bunch of mining people, because mining people all think the same way. Well, and that's true. We have very successful people that have all done tremendous accomplishments in the business world, and we have a network that knows how to get things done by bringing in the people that have the knowledge. We've all learned a lot, but when you look at the relationship piece to this, where this is located, it's within the ancestral homelands of multiple tribes, including the Nez Perce, the Shoban. I mean, these are important regions. And part of understanding the strategies to move forward is to understanding the impact that gold mining has had on the tribes. And really think about it. If you look at what has happened to the tribes because of gold mining, you'll understand their hesitancy and their lack of trust. But thanks to Chantel and Sean, and even my background, is we're not just building relationships with the tribes, we're building partnerships. We're building partnerships with the Forest Service, with the conservation groups. We're talking to them so that we can understand what their concerns are before we move things forward. One of the projects that we have going on is the design for the new access road. You saw the picture Matt had up of how steep and windy and difficult that road is. Well, another important piece to that road is it's 1.5 miles in very steep terrain that wants to wash out every time you have a thunderstorm, that it causes sediment in a sensitive waterway. So that's 1.5 miles. Our new proposed road is essentially just a little bit longer in distance, but it has no water crossings. Instead of grades of 32%, which is real fun, let me tell you, particularly moving heavy equipment, it's got grades of 8%. Instead of requiring a cat to pull a trailer to move anything heavy up the road, we can actually, under the new design, we can now use a semi and a lowboy to access. But a big piece to this is having conversations while we work on that design. I've already shared those designs and the strategy with the Nez Perce tribe, their watershed division, the Idaho Conservation League, the U.S. Forest Service, because we want their feedback. because what we can do in partnerships, when you just saw our press release with Myclenium and Redstone and the work that Chantel's doing, is now we can look at bioremediation and water quality as we obliterate a mile and a half and remove culverts and stop silting in a sensitive waterway. When we talk about the stockpiles that are going to have to be moved, it's a lot easier to go to the table with partnerships already in existence with Myclenium, Redstone, and the other organizations, the Nez Perce tribe, and the organization Chantel's working with, to present a plan. When we move those, we're not just going to move those. It's a reclamation project. We're going to remove those, and then we'll utilize the services of these other groups that we've built partnerships with to eliminate the heavy metals that are left in the soil that happen when you have stockpiled ore that's been rained on and snowed on for over 100 years. We can solve that problem. So when our goal and part of the acquisitions of the private property that we have is, we have the headwaters of what's called Webfoot Creek, which drains into sensitive waterways. It ends up into Warren Creek, which ends up into the Salmon River. These are all important waterways.
So let me just step in for just one moment, Dan.
Yeah.
What I think is very important is that a lot of sites have this work to do, and that work doesn't create revenue. The surface disturbances that we're removing for the Forest Service is going to create revenue. That is the stockpiled ore, or it is the mining spoils at Unity. So we're in a unique situation where we have surface assets that are worth more than our company value today, multiples of our company value. So with that, by removing those and remediating properly, we get to be in revenue before we're MSHA certified. We get to create revenue and help the region around us and do good things for the environment and do what the tribal leadership wants in the region and what ICL wants. Idaho Conservancy League is very powerful regionally, very, very powerful. Look at the lawsuits they file, look at what they do. We were able to meet with them by their request, and they like what we're doing. That is gargantuan. We are going to continue to drive towards revenue. We are going to drive towards environmental responsibility. Part of me finding this project in 2021 was I was looking for access to regional waterways to make them better. It's a big part of why I'm here. So we're going to continue to do that as part of our focus. The other side of what we're doing is that, and I know it's getting close to an hour, so as we focus on our operational expansion, technology advancements, and strategic acquisitions regionally, we're doing so in a capacity to create revenue. We have identified the majority of the equipment for our new facility. It's a 15,000 square foot facility that's planned with a dual channel mill. So we're going to be processing both PGM separation and gold and silver separation there. Our target is to get that 15,000 square foot facility built by 2026. Andrew Playa thinks we can build it by the end of 2025. We'll see. But during that time period, we'll also be expanding our mill facility in Warren currently to expand production and create greater revenue. We already have a great deal of assets that are already ready for separation and the metallurgical engagement of the process for revenue. So as we maximize and celebrate that and get to that piece with Guy, his team, and Matt, we're going to take what we've been working on for a year and monetize it. And we're going to continue to grind and stockpile so that can be consistent, because it's much easier to get it from where it is today to revenue than where it was. So we have all that leadway, and we're going to win very heavily on this. And I am very excited for our future. I wanted to keep it about an hour today. Dan, is there anything?
If I could just add one more thing that I think is an important piece. One of the biggest hurdles to projects moving forward in the mining world is litigation. And it's because a lot of their strategies are reactive remediation to environmental concerns. The difference between those companies, and there's lots of them, they get sued all the time. They spend hundreds of millions of dollars in the courts, is we're building the partners. We're doing proactive remediation so that we're not tied up in lawsuits. It's also behind our strategies to keep our operations on private land so that we don't have to, we're not subject to the same processes that occurs on the public lands. And one of the pieces, I've had, lots of conversations with Steve Dobson, and I wish Steve could have been here today because one, he's a lot of fun, but he's an incredibly smart individual. But Steve talks about, as a geologist, one of the things you typically do is you spend years on projects where they're doing drilling and they're doing all of this exploration. And he said, as a professional, you're working on a dog. And he says, I've worked on a lot of dogs. And he says, one thing I love about being here, I know this is not a dog and it's something special. And I can't agree more.
Perfect. So with that, I just want to thank everybody again for really supporting the company and participating with us. I've done a lot of venture capital in my life at this point. I've done a lot of different projects. I still do other projects, as some of you know. I spend 97% of my time on Sydney. This is very exciting to me. We're at a stage where we get to make a difference for a lot of people. We get to make a difference for the region and Idaho and growth beyond. So as one of our interested advisors said to us mid-year last year, when he visited this site, Dennis Cruz said, this is how we beat China in his capacity, because they're one of the largest producers of rare earths and PGMs globally. We are a strategic site at this point for the government. We do have Andrew and Dennis speaking with various interested members in the cabinet on behalf of Sydney. So we have had that discussion. We have been brought up to the DOD. We have been brought up to the Secretary of State. We will continue to engage that environment and other senators. So this is part of our growth, is going to be in effort to be nationalistic and grow in the capacity to support our nation and make a difference. We will continue to do that. So with that, I just want to thank everybody for their time today. And I look forward to a very, very promising 2025 and beyond.
Thanks, Sean. And I want to thank everybody as well, Matt and your team and our board. We've got a great board, and they're engaged. And they have the same passion that we do. They're just not out, in front all the time, but I'll tell you, they're there and they support us, and they're a tremendous group to work with. And I really want to thank Chantel, particularly on her leadership on the environmental side and in that relationship building capacity, particularly at the state level and with the tribes. She's done tremendous work, and she's really laid out a great roadmap for how we can deal with the ESG processes and do that well. But thank you, everyone. I appreciate all of your support, and we're looking forward to another great year of accomplishments.
What do we always say, Steve, about this? We got what? We got gold. And a few other things crawling around across that table. That is one fine looking tale.
Really understanding with Western Frontier, that's the type of quality service that we're getting throughout this project. This is one complex project, but we're getting it figured out. As I always like to say, we got gold and a few other things. So
what do we always say, Steve, about this? We got what? We got gold. And a few other things crawling around across that paper.